This is the not so new 2020 Lexus GS F. We don't see very many of these on the road, but today we're going to find out why I prefer this over the German competition. So at first glance, it almost seems like the GS F is a bit of a disappointment. Starting on the interior, there's some things that kind of confuse me. The cup holder lid, for example, doesn't quite line up, which is a little bit confusing. The climate control is dedicated, which is a very big plus. I really enjoy it when the climate control is separate from the infotainment system. However, one of the main functions of the climate control, the synchronization of the dual temperatures, you have to actually go into the infotainment system to adjust. Speaking of that infotainment system, it's very difficult. It's not particularly intuitive to use. There's no Apple CarPlay, even for 2020, and I believe other Lexus models have Apple CarPlay at this point, or Android Auto. So there's just a lot of things in the interior that can drive you a little bit insane. In terms of how the vehicle feels, the brakes feel a little bit softer than you would expect from a sporty vehicle of this class. All these little things kind of either annoy you or make you feel like this isn't the car for you. Every time I change lanes, for example, I'm reminded that the turn signals are the momentary type, where you have to push it once and then it springs back in the center position, and it's just very confusing to use. So driving me insane. However, there are a few things on here that I think you're going to really enjoy. Starting with the engine. It's a 5-liter V8, 467 horsepower and 389 pound-feet of torque. And the big thing is, there is no turbo or supercharger, so that means you get instantaneous power, there's no lag, it doesn't create the big huge numbers that the Germans have, but the way it delivers just feels so special and it just sounds absolutely fantastic. Give it a listen, drop it a couple gears here, you just take off. The steering, though, has to be my favorite thing because there's absolutely no dead spot on center. There's a light delicacy to the steering, but with lots of precision as well, which is something that a lot of car manufacturers can't seem to get a hold of. They either go too heavy and then kind of get some steering feel in it, or they make it too light and then make it incredibly vague. The Lexus is perfect, in my opinion. There's 3 different modes. You got normal, sport, sport plus. There's also an eco mode, which you probably never use. My favorite thing about all these different modes, though, is that they're all good. There isn't one mode that ruins the car. There isn't one mode that makes the suspension bearable. To be honest, I don't notice a huge difference in ride comfort between the different modes or the steering. I just think it's great in all modes. It's not extra heavy in sport mode or anything like that. That's always my concern, is in those fancier sport modes, the steering becomes obnoxiously heavy and it's just trying too hard to be sporty. What makes the steering sporty isn't the weight of the steering, it's the sensations that you get, the feedback that you get to be able to adjust the car when it's on the edge of balance. So that's really nice. The big thing that the modes change, though, are going to be how the transmission responds. It's an 8-speed auto, and I thought it'd be a little bit faster responding when I first started driving it. We drove the LC500 a couple years ago. It has the same engine, but that transmission is a 10-speed auto. This is an 8-speed. This one doesn't quite respond as quickly as I would hope, and sometimes when you downshift, I'm not entirely sure it's actually rev matching, so it feels like it's trying to jam it into a lower gear. The other thing that's caught my attention are the brakes. They're very good. They stop the car incredibly quickly, especially with a car that weighs this much. But when you step on them, there seems to be a little bit of softness. It doesn't have that heftness that I would look for in a car of this performance caliber. Again, they stop the car really well. They just feel softer than their performance suggests. It's kind of odd. Lexus's design language has been a little controversial over the past few years. To be honest, I kind of like it because it means they're experimenting and trying to break the mold and trying to make the cars a little bit more interesting. A lot of people don't like the look of the GS when it got refreshed to this design. The F only came in this facelifted design. I quite like it. You know, it's a little bit polarizing. It works for the car. It's aggressive, it's sharp, it works with the rest of the lines of the car. I also love the other details on the F. You got the slightly flared fenders with the vents. You also got the smoke chrome up front. You got the black mirror caps. You got these beautiful 19-inch forged wheels, which are standard, by the way, but it's a matte black finish if you don't pay the extra for these hand-polished wheels. You can also get blue brake calipers as well. Overall, the car is just the right balance of aggressive, interesting, but also a very normal shape. It's not a sloped coupe design, it's a pretty standard sedan design. Looks good in my opinion. The rest of the car in terms of how it handles, though, that's where this car shines. From the delicacy of the steering that we talked about earlier, to the way the car is balanced, to the way the car slides very gracefully. When it starts to slip, you can feel it slowly stepping out. It doesn't just snap on you. It's a very gradual slide, and that's from proper engineering. That's not from traction control. The differential on this car is also very clever as well. There's different settings you can adjust for that. It's overall just such an impressive car in terms of handling, and it does that from having far less horsepower than any of its competitors. We've run into this type of problem before with the Aston Martin, a car that fundamentally has a lot of flaws, but at the end it still wins your heart over. I think on paper, the German competition is going to be better. The E63 AMG is faster, the BMW M5 is faster as well. In fact, on Lexus's own website, they don't even compare the GSF to these cars. They compare it to the lesser cars like the BMW M550i rather than the full-blown M5, and the Mercedes E55 AMG rather than the E63 AMG. So on paper, again, this car isn't as impressive as the competition. But I think that's missing the point, and that's why I love this car, is because it appeals to something a little bit deeper. Lexus is focused so much on the driving experience rather than the raw numbers, and presumably that's why you watch these videos as well. If you want to look at specs, you can just compare them online, but to understand how a car feels, that's why you trust people to explain it to you in a video or in a review like this. Does the GSF have faults? Sure. It doesn't have Apple CarPlay, which is a missed opportunity for such a large screen. The center display here is kind of weird. I don't like the graphic for the Sport Plus mode. Every other Lexus has a really pretty gauge font the higher up you go in the sport settings and whatnot. But the Sport Plus one on here is like a yellow bar instead of a needle for the RPM. On top of that, you can't do burnouts, which is a bit unfortunate because this car would be a great burnout machine. When you press on the brake, it automatically cuts any type of power to the engine. But overall, it wins your heart. That's why you buy a car, right? Hopefully you're not just buying a car to show off to your friends what your car can do on paper. Hopefully you buy a car that appeals to your heart and that makes you excited about driving. This, after all, is quite Japanese. In the late 90s, all sports cars were limited to 286 horsepower. So at that point, you can't just compete with everyone else by simply making your car faster. You got to make your car handle better, improve on the chassis tuning, all these fine details that were forced upon manufacturers to perfect because they were only limited to so much horsepower. This is a throwback to that era. The GSF reminds me a little bit of the Aston that we drove. Plenty of faults, but there are several things about that car that just makes you absolutely fall in love with it. And that's what really matters.